Kia ora whānau, welcome to this webinar this evening with myself, Angela Bush from ECE Learning Unlimited, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Barbara Watson from Inspired ECE and also Bridgit Williams from Inspired ECE. Welcome, thank you for joining us.
Kia ora.
So
Kia ora.
Let's get underway with getting your ducks in a row. Tonight we're going to be talking about how to make the most of your professional learning budget and achieve improved outcomes for children. So let's get stuck in. Barbara, would you like to make a start on this?
Yes, that's so the expectations and the licensing criteria make it really plain that professional learning is something that all teachers need to be engaged in and that leaders need to be facilitating and making available in their centres and their services. And in particular, C4 around adults' knowledge. And when we work with centres, particularly in CELO contracts, when the ministry's asked us to support services who are needing to get their practice more robust, this C4 is something that's called out often by ERO and by the ministry in terms of teachers needing to be able to make good connections and to really show the depth of their professional knowledge, make it evident that they are up to date with relevant theories and practice in their services. And in terms of GMA, the governance and management criteria, all reasonable steps are expected to be taken by leaders and services to ensure that there is adequate professional support and development. And research shows really clearly that that's not just putting it on the table on the staff room, here's some professional development, but a much more strategic approach to building teachers' capability. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that might look like later.
Thanks, Barbara. I just have a question for you at this point in time. There's a tension between who gets to pay for this. Years ago, of course, we had a specific funding that was provided for, particularly for provisionally certificated teachers, but for teachers in general too, wasn't it, to help pay for professional learning. But now it's inherent that it's in the bulk funding, isn't it? So what are your thoughts around who should be paying for professional learning, teachers or centres?
My answer to that would be generally the centres, but it's also, so if the centre has something strategic that's within their annual plan that they're wanting all teachers in the service to participate in, then absolutely that's the centre's responsibility as far as I'm concerned. There can be some individualisation. There's certainly many centres who send individual teachers to support goals in their professional growth cycle, for example, particular aspects of practice that they're needing to or wanting to build. And that is also the responsibility of the service. However, teachers themselves may want to do above and beyond. But generally speaking, I think it's the service's responsibility and the teachers to be fully engaged in that process.
Sure, fair enough. And I imagine that some teachers do want to have a little bit of control themselves, perhaps, and so they will, as you say, choose to invest for themselves.
Yeah.
Thanks, Barbara. I believe this next part is yours too, isn't it?
Yes, although Bridget's probably got some things that she wants to add in as well. So in terms of the Teaching Council's expectations, they see that the professional leader of a service has a responsibility to ensure that teachers are engaged in professional learning and development, and that there's an accurate record kept of that. So what I would I would advocate that it's by and large the teacher's responsibility, or it's good for the teacher to take responsibility for keeping track of the professional learning that they do, because then they can take it if they move centres and they still have that record as well. But for accountability purposes, the centre needs to be able to evidence that they have provided professional learning for their teachers. And of course, that support of professional learning of all teachers in a service usually or often takes the form of supporting what's going on in professional growth cycles for teachers. Every year, the appraisal professional growth cycle process needs to make a judgment about whether certificated teachers meet the standards for the teaching profession, and the professional learning standard spells out quite clearly that teachers are expected to grow and develop their practice. Also, the Tiriti o Waitangi partnership standard spells out that you are expected to be improving your practice, and in fact that's a defined point in the endorsement now, is that you have a commitment to the treaty and you are continuing to develop that aspect of your practice. So you're not actually able to demonstrate that you meet the standards unless you're engaging in professional learning. And we'll talk more about what that engagement looks like later as well.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Bridgit?
Particularly, I think what you're really describing here is that there are multiple layers. There are requirements through our regulations around licensed early childhood centres to be providing for teachers, but it's also important for teachers for your own professional learning, stimulation, motivation, ongoing learning, that you're engaging in that to be the best teacher you can. And of course, then it's for children. So it's always for children. We want to be improving and developing our practice so we can do a better job with children. And then even if we look beyond perhaps curriculum and pedagogy to running an early childhood service, then it's good for business too, because engaging in professional learning and having high quality teaching and provision of program means that you will get a great reputation in your community and therefore be sought out. So it's a win-win for everybody, really. It's required, but it's also much more than that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, Bridgit, that in this current climate where centres, early childhood services are struggling to find qualified staff and recruit them, that certainly providing professional learning is a really great recruitment tool, because a lot of most teachers will want to work for an early childhood service where professional learning is provided and where they know they're going to have the opportunity to engage in ongoing learning as part of their team and as part of their job. So it's definitely important for recruitment.
Yeah, what I often find myself saying is that we're in the business of teaching and learning. So if you're not interested, either as a leader, a centre owner, manager, or a teacher, if you're not interested in ongoing learning, then I think this might be the wrong place, because we're in the business of teaching and learning. And so, you know, there are lots of other areas where you can dedicate your life that aren't so focused on ongoing learning, but ours isn't one of them.
No, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So alongside that, obviously very clearly, as you mentioned, Bridgit, is the importance of staying current so that our practice is current in the best interest of children. And would you like to add anything else there in relation?
Yeah, sure. I think that in early childhood, I often hear from teachers, and sometimes I guess I even feel it myself, is that there's constant almost change. And that change comes in the form of new documents from the ministry or from Aero, or this is the next thing. Or I mean, going back, you know, some examples I can think of off the top of my head is it was and possibly continues to be, you know, as simple as, you know, rolling morning tea or not rolling morning tea. You know, this is the thing to be done now, and then it goes out of flavor, and all of that. And the reason that things do change and we do get what might seem like trends or different ways of thinking is that out there in the big wide world, there's research going on in the early childhood sector all of the time. And some of that is happening in our country, and some of it is happening in the rest of the world. And the reason that research and ongoing learning is happening more broadly is that we're continually trying to do a better job and improve our learning outcomes for children. And there are many, you know, even over the last 25 years or so, so much advancement in the area of children's learning, and therefore consequently teaching. So it's important to keep current and to keep learning, because we want to keep doing the best for children. And so that's why, and if we can sometimes reframe that or change the mindset around that it's not something new or different, and why are we changing it, you know, for the sake of it. It's because all that legwork has been done for us by people who dedicate their lives to researching and continually looking into the area of teaching and learning, so we can do a better job. And it's about having the filter to be able to, I mean, obviously some documents and ministry requirements and that sort of thing are necessary, and you need to be doing it. But much of what is new out there is not mandated or compulsory. So it's having that critical eye and being able to go, yes, that's all very interesting, but perhaps that doesn't sit with our community, our whānau, and the children that we serve, and being able to take on what works for you. And that's why it's important to spread far and wide and see what's out there, rather than taking anything as complete and utter gospel, I guess.
And if I could add in there too, those ministry documents or ERO documents, I often see that those things cross leaders' desks and fairly frequently don't get distributed to teachers, or teachers haven't had the opportunity to delve into them and unpack them. And I really think that that's a critical function of leadership, is to devolve that key information that's coming down from our top level ministry and ERO down to teachers, so that they can make sense of it in their own practice. Because without the teachers taking ownership and enacting those things, a centre never can. A leader can't enact, you know, a leader can't use Te Ara Potama, for example, effectively on their own. They need the whole team to understand and when you understand the why behind some of those documents, the purpose or the problem that they're attempting to solve, then usually it makes a whole lot more sense, and it allows that criticality that Bridgit was talking about, and this sifting what's going to be most use in your context to happen when you understand the context in which those documents have been developed.
And I think that also there's the danger, isn't there, if we don't stay current in our practice of continuing to practice from this is the way, what we know and what we've always done and who we've always been, without any real reflection or understanding that perhaps it's time for some of that stuff to move on, and we can keep working from the same place we were in 20 years ago, which isn't necessarily relevant or current with today's pedagogy.
Or the demographic of your centre, or, you know, it's not just documents and pedagogy that changes, but the demands of society in general, and specifically of your centre community. Those things shift and change over time as well.
True. This is true. So at the end of the day, this is what it's all about, isn't it? Where the whole point of us continuing to learn and grow, have professional learning, is to have improved outcomes for children, because that's what we're here for. That's what our jobs are all about.
Yeah. And I think that in our sector, we have been a little bit further behind other sectors in making the strong connections with what we're doing in our teaching with outcomes for children. So I personally remember, probably 10 years or so ago, being asked by a group in the South Island to come and do some work for them. They were actually, I think they were NZEI, and said, you know, can you come down and do a presentation? I said, well, yes, but what would that be on? And so that led to a conversation about, you know, what was current, what was happening. And at that time, I said, well, something that I see as really growing in our sector is being able to make this strong connection between what we're doing as teachers and outcomes for children, because at that time, that was really new, as ridiculous as that might sound. And I think it's still growing. I think it's still in its infancy, this idea that, you know, what we are doing as teachers and the way that we're growing our practice and improving our practice has a huge impact on what happens for children. And so we need to always keep that in mind. And I think that's been assisted by our sector being introduced to teaching as inquiry and a professional growth cycle, because done well, the child is the heart of the matter there. And it's what do children need is what should be the basis for determining professional learning. Not, oh, I'm interested in that, or that sounds really cool, or that's new, or whatever it might be. But what are the children here in my place need, and therefore what do I need to learn? And that I think is a really good starting place. And that, of course, is determined by many different things, including ERO recommendations, but also many other things.
Yeah, and I would also say that internal evaluation fits within that same.
Yes.
The whole internal evaluation process is to make judgment about how effective we are being. And that's a big part, as Bridgit was saying, that I don't think we've been effective in our evaluation and our actual measurement of the impact that we're having on children's learning in early childhood. I think we've, you know, implemented our practice to the very best of our ability and with really good intent, but we actually haven't spent sufficient time, in my view, evaluating, did we actually make the difference we were seeking to make? Yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily, well, it's not anybody's fault or anything's fault, but one thing that springs to mind for me is that we're working with children at a time when their development and their learning is at the most steep, if you like, trajectory. So, you know, if you think of what's happening from birth to 3 or birth to 5, and I think historically there's been this view that, oh, well, children are going to learn heaps and progress heaps and do heaps regardless. And so, yep, we'll be along with them on the way. But now we're understanding through research and development that it makes a huge impact, the quality of interaction and of teaching that is going on to support children's progress. Makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And then let's move on to talk about what it means for us in early childhood services to actually be providing professional learning and the leadership of that. Because I know that from certainly at a centre level, there are a lot of challenges with how we can actually fit this in. The traditional ways of perhaps of sending staff off to a workshop for a day, that, you know, in COVID times, these things have changed and technology has changed and things have moved along somewhat, but it's a real challenge for us to find the time and the space to make this happen. It's a real budget issue, and it's often also sometimes it can be really difficult to motivate staff to get engaged in professional learning. So there are a lot of challenges in the sector.
Yes, there are. We're a very complex sector and have more structural challenges than perhaps a compulsory sector does. But there's some things that we can do to mitigate the effects of some of these challenges. A staff motivation is an interesting one. We can't, people can only really motivate themselves, or as leaders, we can try and tap into what it is that lights people's fire. But many teachers have been involved in professional learning that has been ineffective in the past. The going off on a workshop and then coming back with your ideas buzzing and trying to implement things in your centre and getting nowhere because there isn't that groundswell of support to carry you forward and to make those, help you make those changes. So that form of professional development, professional learning has been shown in research to be pretty ineffective, actually. I call it the spray and pray approach. We sort of send people off all over the place and pray that something results from it in the centre. And with few exceptions, it really does. So engaging people in professional learning modes, I guess, approaches that allow them to do things together as a team, focused on something that has been identified as important and strategic in your service. So whether that's something from an annual plan, for example, to address an error recommendation or a goal that you're trying to progress as a centre, or whether it's something that's emerged from an internal evaluation or professional growth cycle, collaboration is key to effective professional learning, because it's only when teachers come together to discuss these problems of practice or to discuss possible improvements and solutions that the energy is created to actually carry those ideas forward and implement them and embed them into practice to make the change. Because and another thing I'd like to say about changing practice doesn't equal improvement. And what we're about is improved outcomes for children, right? And so you can change your practice, but unless you evaluate it to determine whether outcomes are actually better for children or not, you may have just made a change and not an improvement. That's less likely when you've got this collaboration and many eyes and many minds working together to implement something. It's less likely that you're going to go off on a tangent and leave something unexamined and have ineffective practice as a result.
I think, but Barb, also, around evaluation, again, you've mentioned that a couple of times, and just picking up on what you were saying before about ineffective professional learning. How often are we evaluating the effectiveness of our professional learning? And so a good starting place with that is, has it made a difference? What are we doing differently in our teaching practice as a result of some professional learning you've engaged in? And how is that improving outcomes for children is a really simplistic and a good place to start. And what ties in with that is the leader, obviously, in their ability to lead the conversations around that through being able to use things like facilitated questioning and the ability to provoke teachers' thinking about what are you doing differently. So engaging in professional learning, I sometimes see and hear, even on Facebook groups and things, oh yeah, I went to that, or I've done something with them and it was great. What does that mean? What does great mean? And it was great for you, why and how? And is it going to be necessarily great for someone else? So just, being great is not, we've got to dig deeper than that, because money is tight. and time is tight. And so we want to invest strategically in professional learning to make the biggest difference in the areas that you as a service and your teachers have identified as integral to driving your service forward. And leadership plays a huge part in that. And so often as a leader, we get bogged down in what our teachers might want and need, when actually we as leaders need to develop our skills to be able to lead the learning of our teaching team so that we can contribute to improvement is hugely important. And we talk about that and work with that a lot in the leadership series that will come up later. But I guess I can't emphasize enough that we need to think deeply about the professional learning that's engaged in. And it's not just external, workshops, webinars, things that you're accessing externally through professional learning facilitators or companies or whatever it might be. It's also those professional and collaborative and collegial conversations that happen in a service. They sit very comfortably in that paradigm of inquiry and engagement in the professional learning standard for the standards for the teaching profession. So it's not just all about going or attending something, and that's where leaders, and not necessarily always the positional leader, but that professional learning community idea is established in your service so that you're digging deep, thrashing ideas around, and that leads to plans for development.
Yeah, can I just add a few things here, Bridgit? The idea of it was great. We should be measuring it was great by the improvements in practice, by the outcomes for children. That's the measuring stick. It may not even be particularly enjoyable. We hope that it is, but actually some of the, some professional learning that has really great impact can be really challenging and gnarly and
uncomfortable.
Yeah, for us as teachers, because it's bringing things up that we haven't looked at before, and perhaps would actually quite like not to look at. But
I often talk about disrupting the status quo.
Yeah.
So anything that, and another thing I talk about is, poking and prodding. So in our role as professional learning facilitators, it's not bringing a kitty of tips and tricks and telling you how to do things. It's about having the opportunity to be able to provoke your thinking, to go, okay, that really made me think, and apply that thinking to my context and what we might do about it.
Yeah, and it's not just you that says that, Bridgit, although that's great that you do. Helen Timperley in the best evidence synthesis around professional learning talks about disrupting the status quo, and throwing ideas up, throwing the status quo up for examination. Is this the most effective way of doing things, what we're currently doing? Just a couple of things on the cost of professional learning, because it can be expensive if you're accessing external experts. It's really the best evidence synthesis once again showed that it is important to get externalized, not all the time, but sometimes, to bring in those fresh ideas and to stir things up a little bit, and to perhaps hold the mirror up to your practice or aspects of your practice that you may not be able to see for yourselves. But overseas research in the United States has shown that for every dollar invested in, this is in the area of mentoring support for beginning teachers, but similar things would apply, I'm sure. For every dollar that's invested, there's a return of $7 in terms of intangible things like how long the teacher stays, how teacher retention, and also the expertise and capability that's built in a teaching team when a team is stable. So that's a really good reason to be investing in professional learning. Another way of thinking about the cost is often in the past, leaders have allocated X number of dollars per teacher, and teachers have gone off and done their own thing. And as I said earlier, often very little changes as a result of that. You know, they've had a nice day at a workshop and exposed to some interesting ideas, had a nice lunch, come back and share ideas, but it doesn't actually result in improved outcomes for children. Whereas if that money from those individuals was pooled to do whole team professional development, or at least, you know, multiple people within your team focusing on the same thing, then it's much more likely to give a return for the investment in terms of improved practice and outcomes for children. So I'd really advocate that professional learning budgets are used as a whole centre, or at least part of each teacher's allocation is for whole team professional learning.
I think there's also a risk that if you're allotting a sum of money to individual teachers, that in my mind anyway, it's being viewed somewhat as a perk, as a sort of you've got that amount of money, when actually it's not. We're not talking about something as a bonus or an add-on or a perk. We're talking about something that's integral to the successful functioning for high quality teaching and learning. And so therefore, if we can use that money together, let's all do the best, you know, what is strategic, whether it's aligning with internal evaluation error recommendations, which of course filter through to individual teachers' goals, professional growth cycles anyway. So yeah, that's just a thought.
Yeah. Well, we're thinking about budgets and being cost effective in our spending around professional learning. One of the things that we've found most important, of course, as the budgets got tighter and tighter over the last few years in particular, is to think about, well, what are our strategic goals that our whole centre is trying to achieve, which we've established from doing self-assessment using the Te Ara Poutama rubric, so we understand where are we heading and what are the areas that we need to improve in, and then working out together as a leadership team, well, how can we allocate our budget to the professional learning that we need in order to achieve those goals across the team and across the whole centre. What's going to give us the best bang for our buck, I suppose, if you know what I mean. But also, I think one of the things that I've learned, and perhaps this is actually coming up in the next part here in terms of strategies for making the most of professional learning, one of the things that I've learned the most about in the last year or so, particularly when I've done Barbara's mentoring course and also Bridget's curriculum leadership course, is the absolute significance of leadership in guiding professional learning. It's as you mentioned before, Barbara, it's all very well to send people to a workshop and then they can come back and they might share a bit of that, but actually the best learning that we've found that happens is when leaders are very intentional about walking alongside people and supporting and guiding and mentoring around the professional learning and around their professional development goals that they're working on and the strategic goals. So if we perhaps as a team may have participated in a webinar or everyone has done a course online perhaps, then we need to bring that back to the team. We need to plan to have conversations about that as a team, and then team leaders also need to work with teachers individually, one-on-one in observation and giving feedback and further deepening their personal individual understanding around what it is that we're learning and thinking about.
And that takes skill, Angela. So in the leadership, that's why professional learning for leaders is so important, because as leaders, many leaders in early childhood have become leaders because they're good teachers of and with children. And the skill set required to lead the learning of a teaching team is I wouldn't say entirely different, but very different. And so it makes enormous sense that there is investment and engagement in supporting leaders' professional learning. As I was saying before, you've got a team meeting, you're going to talk about something, but has the person leading that discussion got the skills to provoke thinking and to help make sense of everybody's thought and to facilitate the progress of that? Because otherwise, the good stuff that's happening for individuals will disappear into the ether because it's not able to be facilitated by somebody to capture and then move forward to impact outcomes for children. So professional learning for leaders is very important. And then what that enables is to be able to use the professional learning that you're all engaging in to the best advantage.
Yeah, I add to that, having been a centre owner or co-owner and manager myself, I know that I tended to prioritise professional learning for my teaching team and put myself at the bottom if there was any money left over. But the danger, as Bridget's alluded to in that, is that the teachers are learning, but you as leader are not in the position to maximise the impact of that learning into changes, improvements in practice and outcomes for children. And that's really about the skills of mentoring, the skills of curriculum leadership, leading teachers learning, as Bridget said. The other thing around the leader's position in professional learning, once again coming from the best evidence synthesis led by Helen Timperley, is that the single most impactful condition, I guess, the thing that impacts most on the effectiveness of professional learning or not is the level of engagement of the leader. So that's the level of engagement isn't just about providing the money or providing the release time or whatever. It's about what Angela was saying, getting alongside teachers for those discussions, having those facilitative questions, mentoring one-on-one coaching to make sure that the teaching team are maximising the use of the new information that they have taken in their practice, and then that will flow on to better outcomes for children. So.
I've certainly learnt over time that one of the most effective ways that we've been able to bring about change in practice, improvement in practice from professional learning is to come at it from a multifaceted approach. So if there is a particular area of practice that we wish to work on, for example, Te Tiriti or Waitangi based practice, or our team in particular, one of our goals at the moment is working on our RAI-based practice, because that's part of our philosophy, is that we will provide for our team, all of our team, they will be engaged in webinars and online courses. Then we will also provide reading material for them. We might find a podcast or something they can listen to, or something on YouTube. So there's different ways that we'll tap into the professional learning opportunities that are available. We will, during COVID times, we held Zoom meetings as a team and discussed the things that we were learning. And also, as I mentioned before, it's feeding all of that into professional development goals, but also team discussions at team meetings. We ask our teams our teachers to spend about half an hour of their non-contact time each week engaging in professional learning. And then when the team leaders have regular one-on-one kōrero with their team, individual team members, they will talk about what it is that they've been watching, reading, learning, engaging with, and relating that to their practice and what they've observed about that. So there's a real, as you said, there's a real skill set around the leaders being able to do that. And we've had to work very hard on building leadership capability, and we continue to do that so that our leaders are capable of having those conversations and understand that big picture thinking of how we are going to make progress and continuous improvement, and also accepting and understanding that that happens over time. Sadly, it doesn't all change and happen overnight.
There's another, I think, part to that, Angela, and that is the prioritizing of it. So that picks up on the idea that professional learning is not just engaging in a webinar or listening to a podcast or reading an article. But what you're describing there is, okay, you might do those things, but it's the collaborative and the sharing of that makes a real difference. And I think that for some people, they may be thinking, oh my goodness, that's all very well, but we don't have the time to do that. But I would encourage people to think about what time you do have and how you're currently using it. Because I am in centres a lot where they are meeting regularly, and when I drill down and question them about how and what is happening when they're having those meetings, and whether that's face-to-face or Zoom or however they're communicating, and what comes out of that is there is a lot of fine-tuning to happen around using the time that you do have more effectively. And the bulk of that is done when you prioritise professional learning.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Bridgit. It's definitely, for us, it is definitely a part of our strategic goals to build leadership capability, and it is definitely part of our ethos and leadership across our teams to prioritize team learning, because it's very clear there will not be improvement, there will not be improved practice and improved outcomes for children if we don't, as a leadership team, prioritize how we're going to go about that, bringing this improvement with our teams.
And bringing it to a fore is the most important thing. As you were talking there, it made me think back to my master's dissertation, where I looked at the conversations that mentors and mentees were having, and what sort of conversations were they having, what was the content, what strategies and things were mentors using. And what I found in that little piece that I did was that a mentor and a mentee can have, and that might be a leader and a teacher, whatever it might be. This was provisionally certificated teachers and their mentors in this context, but it could be any sort of conversation. And what I found that often teachers were talking together one-on-one, half an hour, sometimes even longer, and there was no mention of children's learning or teaching. And that was shocking. It wasn't particularly shocking to me, I might add, because I'd done lots of background reading and things. But for those teachers, both mentors and mentees, in their minds, those conversations were all about supporting teacher learning and therefore improved outcomes for children. And so when their conversations were recorded and the outcomes were shared with them, it was quite shocking for them to realise, oh my goodness, I've just spent half an hour skirting around, and a lot of it, without going into too much detail, we spend a lot of time describing what's going on rather than analysing and getting deep. And so what I mean by that is, for example, if you're having a conversation with somebody, describing as, I saw you do this and then you did this and then that happened and that happened. So that's describing. Well, that doesn't add any value to anybody's learning. They know what they did, you know what you saw, let's dig a bit deeper. And that was simply not happening in this piece of work that I did. And so I guess using that analogy and perhaps transporting it to either one-on-one conversations that are happening between leaders and teachers and centres, or even whole team meetings, you know, how much time is spent stimulating and provoking and facilitating robust and productive conversation about teaching and learning. That's what I would challenge, because as soon as you flick that over and it becomes, the conversation becomes about teaching and learning, you're engaging in professional learning. That's what's happening. And so, yeah, that I think is quite a useful and consequently powerful thing to be thinking about.
I noticed, Angela, you shared that you get your teaching team to dedicate a certain amount of time for professional learning activities and then non-contact time each week. And I can almost hear participants listening going, oh my goodness, but there's so much assessment to do, or whatever, which is what typically happens, of course, in non-contact time. But, you know, that I applaud that approach, because it's, you know, writing more learning stories, particularly ineffective ones, is not going to improve teaching practice or outcomes for children. Whereas, you know, spending some dedicated time professional learning, particularly if it's then shared, as we've been describing, and amongst a teaching team with a buddy who's looking at something similar, or with your whole team, to be then able to be implemented and embedded into practice, that's what's going to make the difference. So I think also looking creatively as far as is possible, and I know there's all sorts of constraints to this, but I also think that as leaders, sometimes we're a little bit boxed into the status quo and how we use non-contact time. If we're able to release multiple people at a time, and I'm increasingly hearing that at the moment many centres numbers are quite low, so there is that potential sometimes to release multiple teachers. Have two teachers who are working on the same sort of aspect for their professional growth cycle spend time together talking about what they're learning and how they're implementing that into their practice and what difference they're seeing. Make it's not particularly innovative really, but it's not what usually happens.
And I think all of this can be focused around three pretty simple ideas or questions, and that is, what are you learning? How is it making a difference to your teaching? And therefore, how is it making a difference to children's learning? So if you're having a conversation in dedicated, you know, non-contact time, or, you know, part of what we're talking about here is money, bang for your buck. If you're having a conversation in that time and it's not focused on any of those aspects, then that's questions to be thinking about.
Yeah, and that what you just described there, Bridgit, are questions that would allow somebody to share their learning with you. And also it's encouraging leadership in learning, because the person asking those questions is leading the other teachers' learning, or is the making sense of their learning anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that we also have to get really smart with our time, and you know, time is very limited for teachers, and we're trying to squeeze more and more into a day. But you know, staff meetings, for example, we would meet every 2 weeks, and those are not times where you want to be wasting time talking about you know, maintenance, or I don't know, the nitty-gritty, the stuff that could be done in an email or an all-team message. Anything that is just communicating, please do this and please do that, that can happen in writing, it can be in an email, it can be in a group message. Staff meetings are precious time when you've got everybody together, and it's actually professional learning time. The majority of our team meetings would be spent 50-50, talking about children and discussing what we're noticing, recognizing, and responding to, and talking about our practice and what we're working on, and our shared understanding and our learning together, and guiding and teaching our teams as well. So team meetings are critical, but also recently, for example, I'm just going back to what you said before, Barbara, really good point. what is the point of spending time writing learning stories if you're going to write them really badly? We recently did an internal evaluation and very strongly and clearly recognised that our assessment practices needed a huge amount of improvement. So we actually completely stopped our teams from writing anymore. We said, no more writing in portfolios for now. What we need you to focus on in the next 3 months of non-contact time is your own learning. And so all of the non-contact time pretty much was dedicated to their own learning for some time, because otherwise we were just mass producing poor outcomes in terms of assessment and writing. So there was just no point. Stop the bus. Let's all get on board and learn together and improve what we're doing, and then we can go back to. It did, of course, terrify people, because they're like, well, we're not doing any planning or anything, but well, we weren't doing it very well anyway, so let's just not do it for a while.
And well, you would have still been planning, you just wouldn't have been writing it down.
You wouldn't have been documenting it.
No, we were doing it in action. We were still having conversations at staff meetings about children, what we're noticing, recognising, responding to. We just weren't documenting it. We weren't writing in children's portfolios.
There's another piece to what you're talking about, Angela, and that is that I often talk about reframing what it is to be a teacher. And so I'm still coming across quite a lot of teachers and teams, and even sometimes thinking within an entire team around the discussion or conversation or collaboration, if you like, that teachers might have when they're actually teaching in action. So how come, and people might be thinking, oh yeah, we do that all the time, and that's great. But I do come across a lot of teachers who don't think it's okay to talk about children's learning or teaching as it's happening right in front of them. And so we don't always need to have a designated time. You know, we have an overarching belief in early childhood that children are capable and competent, and that children are strong drivers of their own learning. And so we are not always needed, if you like, to be right there and on the action with children. Sometimes for a couple of minutes or so, teachers could be saying, hey, what do you reckon about that? What's happening there? What do you think I could do there? You know, in real time. And I know, yeah, we could talk about that for a long time, but that's just planting that idea, rethinking about what it is to be a teacher, because to me, that's a really, that's about being an active teacher, a thinking, intentional teacher, as if I hear that going on.
And that once again comes back to the leadership, usually in the service, allow it, you know, looking for those opportunities where that can happen, that just-in-time coaching, and the culture of collaboration and problem solving that exists.
And we've actually provided a handout for everybody for this webinar that has a bunch of suggested strategies for how you can make the most out of professional learning and lead learning in your centre. So have a look for that too. That's provided with the webinar, and there are a lot of strategies in there. And I was just thinking too, but Bridgit, when you were saying there about having conversations, I think it's also one of the leadership strategies that I encourage our team leaders to take is to on a Monday, for example, is to catch each of your team members and say, hey, what is it that you're focusing on this week in your teaching? What is it that you're focusing on in your own learning? And so that recenters people at the beginning of the week. Yeah, that's right. This is my goal. This is what I'm working on at the moment. Or they might say to their team, remember team, this week we're really doubling down on this part of our practice. So that there's this constant reminder of what is it that we're focusing on? What is it that we're working on and learning? Because what I see happening a lot of is people will start the year with a hiss and a roar, set their professional growth cycle goals, and then nothing happens for the rest of the year.
Yeah, well, what that does, and that's, you know, great strategy, leadership strategy, is to keep that at the forefront of thinking for teachers. And so that supports purposeful teaching, intentional teaching. Oh, well, what I'm doing, why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I know that it will lead to better outcomes, or I'm doing this, or I'm trying that. It's okay to try. You know, teaching is partly experimental. So I'm going to do something different this week is absolutely fine, because I think that it might lead to better outcomes. Yeah.
And I think that that observing and giving feedback in the moment as well, and in action is just as important too. I observed one of our team leaders leading a team meeting the other night, and she's focusing on her leadership, and so I was immediately able to give feedback about how she led that and what she did, and the things that I felt that she could think more about or provoke her thinking around, in terms of how she was delivering and managing the meeting, and how she was managing people's learning, her team's learning in that meeting.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, probably pre-COVID, I guess, that sort of real-time coaching was increasingly becoming part of our face-to-face work, in terms of teachers working with children. So we're almost teaching alongside and being able to give feedback right then and there. And absolutely, you know, something like facilitating a team meeting can easily be done over Zoom and that sort of thing.
I'm literally on an iPad, and they're all in a room together, and I'm on an iPad in the room with them.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, I think we just about covered everything there. Were there any final thoughts, Barbara and Bridget, that you'd like to add there?
Just that in terms of what we're doing, and Angela, you doing most of it at ECE Learning Unlimited, is really as a result of all of this that we have been discussing. So the fact that we're providing professional learning in the online space, and now providing a membership, all is underpinned by our years of experience, all three of us, in the early childhood sector, and what we believe will support teachers in the most cost-effective and productive ways in their professional learning. It's not the only way, of course, but it's what we have designed at this time, because we think it has the real opportunity to make a difference for teachers' learning and the functioning of services.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, Bridget, that while we do have a paid subscription, a membership that's extremely cost effective, and for teams and for individual teachers and for teams, we also provide an awful lot of free stuff that you can access. We've got blogs, we've got podcasts, we've got YouTube. There's a lot of stuff that's going on that you can access quite freely, and utilize that with your team. Grab one of those pieces of professional learning and share that with your team, and then use that as a basis for conversation and for ongoing discussion and reflection on your practice.
Yeah, using those sorts of things as well, using anything actually that we provide or anybody else provides as a springboard to apply your critical lens and have those discussions. And particularly, I know that there will be a lot of leaders tuning into this. So being able to be critical of your own practice, and if you're thinking, well, I'm not sure that I have the skills to facilitate and to provoke and to lead learning, then that may become a centre point for your own professional learning.
And if I can add to that, if you are tapping in, to our webinars or programs for your team, or those of other people, other providers as well. Part of what Bridget and I do is we can have follow-up conversations with your team or a leader to help you strategize around how to maximize the impact of that professional learning, if you would like that extra support. So if you don't feel well positioned to be able to take that professional learning forward, then we could have a Zoom or with your team, or a conversation with the leader to strategize around taking it.
And actually, Barbara, you've just reminded we've got professional learning groups coming up this year as well that leaders would really benefit from taking advantage of. And that's an opportunity for you to be involved in a professional learning group with other people in senior leadership positions as well. And those groups are forming very shortly, and they'll be meeting 4 times a year. So look out for those too, because that's another great opportunity for leadership development. Okay, I think it's time for us to end this evening. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. This is being recorded, and it will be available for you to access and revisit if you'd like to, also with the handout that we've provided in the digital classroom. So you just need to sign back into ECU Learning Unlimited into your login space. You'll learn a dashboard, and it will be there waiting for you. Thanks, Barbara and Bridget.
Kia ora,
Pleasure.
Next time. Ka kite ana whānau.